Hello and welcome back to Straightforward, Levant TV's political debate show focusing on the Middle East. Relations between two major NATO allies, the US and Turkey, have suddenly assumed a new dimension over Kobani. The American move to arm Kurds in the city, also known as Ain al-Arab, is said to have a profound effect on regional balances between Turkey, the Kurds and the United States. But how effective is the airdrop arming campaign? On Wednesday, ISIS has released a video appearing to show fighters brandishing boxes of US weapons in Kobani, while they were intended for Kurdish fighters. For weeks, Turkey's military has blocked Kurdish volunteers, both Syrians and Turks, from joining their breath and holding out against fighters with the militant group Islamic State. Even more, many in Syria believe Turkey wants Kobani to fall. But what does arming the Kurds mean when it comes to Syria's president? We will be looking at this from more than one angle with our guest here at the studio, Dr. Jawad Milla, President of the Kurdistan National Congress. Welcome on Straightforward. And before we delve into our discussion, let's have a look at this brief report.
This week, the US military dropped weapons, ammunition and medical aid to Kurdish forces defending Kobani against Islamic State militants, while Turkey said it would allow Iraqi Kurdish fighters to reinforce the Syrian border town. Following several weeks of airstrikes by the US-led coalition in and around Kobani, the airdrops were the first time weapons and ammunition had been provided to local Kurdish forces. The US resupply effort marked a radical change in American policy towards direct cooperation with Kurdish fighters on the ground, whom Turkey has denounced as terrorists. Some observers pointed out that the perceived policy shift in Ankara was no surprise, pointing to a string of violent protests that shook Turkey 2 weeks ago in response to the government's perceived inaction regarding the crisis in Kobani. Mesut Yigan, a historian of the Kurdish issue, said that Turkey could not risk the fall of the town. Meanwhile, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said he sees no difference between the PKK, which has been fighting for Kurdish self-rule in Turkey since 1984, and ISIS. US officials have stressed that their policy towards the Syrian Kurds and Turkey has not changed.
Let me just say very, very respectfully to our allies, the Turks, that we understand fully the fundamentals of their opposition and ours to any kind of terrorist group, and particularly, obviously, the challenges they faced with respect to the PKK.
US Vice President John Kerry said that he and President Obama had made it very, very clear that it is not a shift of policy by the United States. But by bypassing Turkey and supplying the Kurds directly, Mr. Kerry's words leave some room for doubt.
Syrian Kurdish leaders were set to redraw the map of the Middle East last night with the imminent declaration of a self-governing region inside Syria. Dr. Milla, tell us what is happening in Kobani and how you see things as a separatist Kurdish politician yourself.
The Kurds, for a long time, without any state and without any government. Just recently, we had in Iraqi Kurdistan, and now we have autonomous area in Syrian Kurdistan.
Does every entity, do you think, need to have its autonomy, its own state?
I hope.
Do you think every ethnicity, like the Kurds, should have its own autonomous region? Not all of them have it.
Yes, I hope the autonomous region of the Kurds in Syrian Kurdistan, we call it as Western Kurdistan, and in the South Kurdistan, in the Iraqi Kurdistan. Yes. I hope this, the federalism, the autonomy, to go as one step to have our independence, because we can't protect our people, our culture, our identity without state.
But also, if you have a strong state behind you, like obviously the Syrian government and its army, that also should be an umbrella to protect you, don't you think?
We learned, we have many experience in the history. The politics fragile and bubbly and move from day to day. And yesterday something happening, it is possible to do it yesterday, today it is impossible to do it. So should the Kurds, as other nations in the world, to have their own state, to have their own independence.
And now let's speak to Reverend Dr. Randy Short of Social Action, Human Rights Minister and political analyst, joining us via Skype from Washington, D.C. Welcome on the show. Dr. Short, what do you think of the altering U.S. policy in Syria?
It's very inconsistent and it's very dishonest. The U.S. government has wanted to get rid of the Ba'athist government for decades, going back into the 1940s and 50s. And this most recent episode with ISL, ISIS, Daesh, whatever you want to call them, these are all people that have murky relationships with either the United States intelligence community or the partners of America's regional allies, the Saudis, the Turks, the Kuwaitis, the Qataris, the Israelis, and so forth, and the Jordanis.
And how can you assert that they do have such relations with U.S. intelligence based on reports or?
Well, there are a range of things. I mean, the German intelligence has shown, 2 years ago, that the majority of the people that were fighting in Syria, this is like 2 years ago, like 80, 90% were not Syrians. I mean, how did they get into Turkey? How do they get to have weapons as non-Turkish nationals? How do they get to train? How are they training in Jordan? I mean, how many countries allow people who are not nationals to come into their country and train and do infiltration actions? I mean, it's very obvious. In as much as these governments do these things under what we call plausible deniability, where it's hard to prove certain things, they make it hard. In fact, look at Sharina Shem.
Yes, I was going to ask you, what are your impressions of media coverage on Kobani, especially in the United States? And of course, if you would like to comment on Serina's death over there.
Well, I don't watch American media typically, so I can't speak to it. I worked in American media for 4 years, as well as did a stint at Voice of America. I don't have any confidence in American media, so I don't watch it. But from the apathy and the lack of knowledge of the rank and file American that I meet, I'm fairly certain that they get a bunch of garbage. But Sharina Shem's murder is an example of when people do go on the ground and get this hard to find information that's obscured, it's at the risk of life and limb, and she's dead. There are 2 children with no mother.
Press review reporter, of course, we're talking about Serena Shams.
Yes. And the Turkish government said that she was a spy, and she's dead 2 days later. So we need not, we don't have to go for all of the extraneous points in this. President Erdogan of Turkey wants to be essentially a new Ottoman suzerain for the region. They have training bases. Everyone knows that they have that there. People see that Serena was able to expose that they were using NGO humanitarian trucks to bring soldiers into Syria, which is what cost her life. And the same thing, Jordan has things there. Everyone knows that these folks work with the Israelis, they work with Mossad, Shin Bet, they work with the Germans, they work with the Turks, they work with the Saudis. This is a fraud. What's really happening is they want to destroy Syria.
And back to mainstream media in America, do they entertain such thoughts that ISIS and other terrorist factions are working with Mossad and other sides?
The American media, the Middle East, I can just tell you, when I worked for the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer, from my understanding, news from the Middle East has to be vetted by the Israeli Defense Force, has a special office. So we get what the Israelis want us to know about what's happening in the Middle East. Why would they implicate the Mossad or their partners or Turkish intelligence or anyone else that they're working with? So, I mean, the American media, there's a CIA program called Operation Mockingbird, where the CIA has completely infiltrated the American media. The Washington Post, the LA Times, and the New York Times are like the three kings of disinformation and propaganda for the CIA. And that's no secret that Donald Graham's father, I think if it's the right name, I know Donald Graham is the former publisher of the Post, but his father was associated with the CIA. And even now, the Washington Post has been bought by a group that owns Amazon that has CIA relations. So, I mean, there's nothing special about them. There's a film called Killing the Messenger on a reporter that I knew named Gary Webb, who was able to prove that the CIA brought crack cocaine in to kill and destroy African Americans for money. And they destroyed him.
I'm not sure Jesse Lee Peterson would agree on that. But anyway, Reverend Dr. Randy Short, also historian.
It doesn't matter. Jesse Lee Peterson doesn't have a leg to stand on. Gary Webb gave his life. Jesse Peterson is still around giving whatever doggerel he wishes to. The crack came in. The government accounting office said that the CIA did it. So Jesse Lee Peterson, defending the government, would have to contradict the government. So we have this kind of corruption and collusion within the intelligence community, even the heroin that's pouring into your country, England, and in Russia that's claimed 1 million lives as a direct result of the so-called enduring freedom invasion of Afghanistan, where the heroin poppy was replanted, and it's defended by America and its partners in Afghanistan. That's that's cost, like I said, 1 million lives, and it's addicted millions. There's nothing clean about these operations. They just kill and destroy people.
Reverend Dr. Randy Short, also historian, poet, teacher, many thanks for joining us today. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
How would you assess the US position now towards President Erdogan in Turkey, and why is he making things a little bit more difficult to the West in general? He's been cooperative at times, but not so cooperative.
It is the Erdogan. He is against America, or
I'm talking the West in general, and particularly the United States.
It is all a plan, a map. They drew it against the Kurds. Nobody like, not Eastern countries, not Western country, the Kurds to have their own states. Now look at the situation in the last months in Kobani.
Yes.
Turkey, they allowed ISIS to enter. They don't allow the Kurds from Turkey to enter. The American, they dropped the weapons, should be sent to the Kurds. They drop it near from ISIS. It is just if you explain these events, you understand.
Yes.
Not the American, not Turkey, nobody like the Kurds to be win to have their own state. The problem it is, we have about 22 Arabic states. They don't like to have a Kurdish state to take. They think the Arabs that we are going to take a part from Syria or to take a part from Iraq.
You will if you have an autonomous state.
It
has to be somewhere.
It is Iraq and Syria established after the First War regarding the Sykes-Picot agreement, and Iraq and Syria, they came inside Kurdistan. They took part from Kurdistan. Now we come to take it back free. We never been in the part in any state of the area. The other states, they come inside Kurdistan.
And in terms of fighting the Islamic State, do you think it would have been more efficient and effective to have American troops on the ground instead of them airdropping weapons to the Kurds and airstrikes only?
Myself, I prefer the American troops to come better than the Syrian, better than the Turkey, better than ISIS.
And why do you think they'd be better to fight ISIS?
We are looking forward to have some hope the Western country to change their policy, which be drawn in 1923 by Lausanne Treaty, and divided Kurdistan into 4 or 5 parts between these neighboring states. So we have hope always to change, but they have nothing as a racism against the Kurds.
Yes.
So not as the occupiers of Kurdistan, they have something other issue, not as the American. We try to have some rights from the American or the Western countries to recognize the Kurdish state soon.
And now we are joined by Dr. Fadi Hakoura, Turkey Project Manager at Chatham House. Welcome to Straightforward. Dr. Hakoura, do you agree to the fact that Turkey was forced into opening a corridor to Kobani only after the US informed Ankara that it would go ahead with the airdrops anyway, and which only increases doubts about Turkey's commitment to working with its Western partners? Do you agree on that?
I think that Turkey seems to have been pressured, in particular Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan was pressured into allowing passage for the Iraqi Kurdish Peşmerga fighters into Kobani or Ain al-Arab in northern Syria, simply because it came very, very close, very, very shortly after the U.S. airdropped ammunitions, weapons, and medical supply. So yes, Turkey was pressured into providing a corridor for the Iraqi Kurdish forces, and it does show that Turkey is a very, very reluctant participant of the hastily assembled US-led coalition targeting Islamic forces in Syria and Iraq.
Dr. Jawad Millat, do you agree with Dr. Hakoura?
The cause of the Kurds, not humanitarian and medicine and blankets. The Kurds, rich people, we have met every one of Kobani people, they have more than 10 blankets, and they are happy with their lives. The Kurds, the Kobani people and the Kurds in general, they need a political resolution, not humanitarian resolution. The political resolution to recognize the Kurds as a nation without state. We have no state. Should be this point should be sorted out. To send medicine, to send weapons, or to send any other aids to the Kurds, it is not important. The important thing is to have a political resolution.
Dr. Hakoura, many expect the US will use its new leverage over the PYD to push the Kurds to engage with factions opposed to Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, particularly the Free Syrian Army. How effective would this strategy be, in your opinion?
I don't think that the United States has as a priority the removal of President Assad from power. One of the key divisions or differences between Ankara and Washington is the future of President Assad. Turkey wants the U.S.-led coalition's military objectives to include the removal of President Assad from power, whereas the United States shares this objective but wants it as part of a political process rather than as part of a military campaign. So that is one of the reasons why Turkey is extremely reluctant to participate effectively in the coalition against the Islamic forces in Syria and Iraq.
And on Tuesday, the Turkish President said there is nobody left in Kobani now. If Kobani is strategic, then it is strategic for us, not for the United States, unquote. How would you comment on that? And has Erdogan lost his chance to be America's and the West's reliable ally in the region?
Kobani has extremely symbolic importance to assessing the effectiveness of the U.S.-led military campaign against Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. Rather, it has more of a symbolic importance rather than a strategic importance. And so far, what we have seen is that the Syrian Kurdish fighters in Kobani have managed to withstand the assault against the border town, despite doomsday scenarios by U.S. Secretary of State John F. Kerry and the U.S. Pentagon.
Yes.
Also, I think Kobani is very, very illustrative of the deep differences between Washington and Ankara, and it is raising some questions in Washington over Ankara's reliability in satisfying the objectives of against the Islamic State forces in Iraq and Syria.
Yes, and last question, Dr. Hakoura. The likes of Dr. Jawad Millah, the separatists, they believe that now their priority is an autonomous region, despite everything. What do you think of the timing to such rhetoric, especially where Syria is still struggling with a 3-year-long war? Do you think it is top priority now to allow the Kurds to have their autonomous region, or maybe wait until things are more clear in the region before that?
The Kurds have effectively a de facto autonomy in northern Syria now for at least a year, and there's also a Kurd in the Iraqi Kurdish regional government, an autonomous zone in northern Iraq. So I think in de facto terms, it is already a fact on the ground. But I think for the United States right now, the key objective, and for the United States and its European allies, the key objective right now is to target the Islamic State forces in Iraq and Syria, and less about fostering Kurdish autonomy in northern Syria and other parts of the Middle East.
Dr. Fadi Hakoura, Associate Fellow at Chatham House and Guest Lecturer on EU-Turkey Accession at University College London, thank you very much for your contribution.
Thank you.
And it's been said that Iran was the first to arm the Kurds against ISIS in Iraq, and Saleh Musallam, the leader of the Kurdish Democratic Union, met in Paris on October the 12th with US officials just before the US-led coalition agreed to provide arms to the Kurds. Dr. Millah, what do you think of Iran's role in all this?
Before to start with Iran, I want to explain 2 points. Separatist and terrorist. I hear it many times about this movement against that state, or like with that state.
It's not the same though. Separatist and terrorist is different, obviously. When I say separatist, I'm talking about people demanding autonomy.
We are requiring unify the Kurds, not separate the Kurds. We want
no, I meant separate them from Syria. That's what I meant.
We want to unify them. Unify 50 million Kurds. We are larger than Syria. We are 50 million Kurds. And about the terrorist, I remember it is Boston Tea Party operation. The American, they done it during the independence of America from the British.
Yes.
And the British until today, they write it down in their history as a terrorist operation. The Americans, they write it down in their history that it is freedom fighters to be. So this we are asking for freedom of Kurdistan, and maybe other people they translate this freedom to other structures or other words.
And back to the Iranian role briefly.
The Iranian role is exactly as a Turkish role, exactly, because both Turkey and Iran in the history been empires.
Yes.
Yes, their empires not anymore exist, but the mentality of empires still in their mind. They want to have influence, to have control other areas in the region.
And when looking at Kobani as part of the ongoing conflict in Syria, some argue it's not strategically important as such. What do you think?
Any part of Kurdistan is important strategically, because if we lose Kobani and ISIS control it, or any troops as Turkey or others control it, and they will go to other city, will go other second and third cities.
Yes.
So it is very strategic, should keep it under control of the Kurds.
Yes. And now we are joined by Professor Kamal Majid, political analyst and Iraq historian. Welcome back on the show.
Hello, thank you.
Professor Majid, how do you look at the recent developments in Kobani in Syria?
Well, from the Kurdish point of view, I will talk. Unfortunately, the Kurdish people are suffering from many sides, but they themselves are now divided into 4 groups or 5 groups. First of all, the Islamic State is fighting, and among them are the Wahhabi Kurds from Halabja, who are now fighting on the side of ISIL against the Kurds in Kobani. And in fact, the leader of the ISIL who is attacking Kobani was Kurd from Iraq, from the Ansar al-Sunnah or Ansar al-Islam, and he was killed there. So that's one group who are against the Kurds in Kobani. The second group are the PKK and the Kurdish Democratic Union, the PYD. They are defending the Kurds in Kobani, but the Turkish government is against them because the Turkish government have been killing the Kurds of Syria, of Iraq. The Turkish government is killing the the Kurds of Turkey since 1984.
It's a different government today, though.
Today, the Kurdish PKK wants to send their people to defend Kobani against ISIL, and the Turkish government is refusing them. And in fact, the Turkish government only a few days ago bombed PKK positions. That is the second group. Then there is PJAK, who are Iranian Kurds, and are now fighting in Kobani against ISIL. They send their men to go and fight the people, but defend the people of Kobani against ISIL.
Yes, and
the only group who are with Turkey against the Kurds in ISIL are Masoud Barzani's party, Kurdish Democratic Party. They are collaborating because Masoud Barzani is now under the control of the Turks.
Yes,
Because
Dr. Jawad Millah here at the studio would like to comment as well. Do you agree with Professor Majid?
Some of Professor Majid, I agree with some points, and I don't agree with other points. For example, some Kurds from Halabja, they came join ISIS.
Yes.
Some Kurds joined ISIS. This situation happened not to the Kurds, to any nation in the world being kept, not allowed to express what inside themselves. They go to other work, other
actions,
acting. For example, in 1950s,
yes,
the whole Kurdistan, it was communist. Because after the Kurdistan Republic be collapsed, we have no any things to express our inside to say we are Kurds. We not allowed. All of them become communists. After that, in 1961, when General Barzani come and announced the revolution, the Kurds come back again as a national movement.
Professor Majid, from a military perspective, do you think the Kurds of Kobani are capable of combating the Islamic State jihadists?
Let me tell you that, in fact, now Talabani's group, Jalal Talabani's Patriotic Union of Kurdistan, also have declared openly they are against Barzani. Because today in Al-Hayat newspaper, Shahnaz Ibrahim Ahmad, who is one of the leaders of Jalal Talabani's party, are attacking and criticizing Masoud Barzani's policy and the American policy, because she is saying that all the money is and the weapons, she says they haven't received any weapons, although the Americans are saying they have sent weapons, because all the weapons is going to Barzani. It's now Barzani with the Turkish government against all the other Kurds. And Daesh, or the Islamic Halabja Kurds, are also, in fact, are the enemy of Kurdish people. They are fighting on the side of Daesh and of ISIL. So therefore, the Kurdish people are once again suffering because of collaboration with imperialism and collaboration with Turkish government and collaboration with ISIL. And there are, of course, the good Kurds like the PKK, like Talabani now is realizing that they are being excluded. And Barzani is now selling his country to imperialism and to Israel and the Turkish government, because Barzani making fantastic amount of money out of the Turks. If you go to the cities of Erbil or Duhok or Sulaimania, it's packed with Turkish commodities, and Turkish companies are making a fantastic amount of projects in Kurdistan, and it's all with partnership with Nachirvan Barzani and Masoud Barzani. And Masoud also is selling oil to Turkey, and Turkey is refusing to pay the money because it's against the Iraqi laws. So Masoud Barzani is doing everything to defend Turkish interests. And then there is a military base in Bamini near Duhok with 3,000 Turkish army. The Masoud Barzani is collaborating with them to go and kill the Kurdish people in Kobani. In other words, the Turks and Barzani are killing them from one side, and ISIL is killing them from the other side. And at the end, they want really to weaken the Kurdish of
Dr. Majid.
Yeah.
Now, in Iraqi Kurdistan, they have a government and they have a parliament. They are on the ground, and they are as a state, and they have no any way to go outside from Kurdistan. Should have some kind of relation with Turkey, with Iran, because their border with Turkey and Iran, and any state in the world was neighboring with some kind of Turkey and Iran. Yes, we are completely against the policy of Turkey and Iran. We are against their racism against the Kurds, but they have no choice in Iraqi Kurdistan. They are now a state. They have responsibilities of a state.
They have every choice, because Talabani is not doing that. PKK is not doing that. It's only Barzani who's criminalizing the Kurds. Don't think that the Kurds are united. You are only fooling yourself, because Talabani is against Barzani now, because Talabani is not getting anything. PKK is being bombed by the Turkish government, and it's not just Masoud Barzani who is making his billions and investing it in Switzerland and talking about Kurds, and in fact selling his own country to the Americans, to Israelis, and to Turks. Jalal Talabani is not doing that. PKK is not doing that. PJAK is not doing that. It's only Masoud Barzani. And if you think it is the other way around, then I'm afraid you are not in touch with what is happening in reality in Kurdistan. You want to show that the Kurds are all united in the parliament. This is not...
Dr. Majid, I agree with you that Turkey against the Kurds, Iran against the Kurds. But 2 years ago, I met Mr. Barzani. 2 years ago, I visited him in his quarter, and we talk about to establish the Kurdistan National Congress to make a unity for the Kurds. We are 50 million Kurds, and we are very great power. We leave Mr. Barzani to do this duty of
Always
the unity of the
your
Kurds,
enemy, your enemy.
we can sort it out many problems.
Never. Barzani is with America and Israel against the Kurds. Barzani is with Turkey. Turkey says so. Turkey is sending Barzani's Peşmerge to Kobani, not Jalal Talabani's, not PKK. You see that. Why are you trying to tell as if the Kurds are all united against Barzani and Barzani is with Turkey? Barzani is against PKK. PKK wants to send their men to defend the Kurds in your Syrian Kurds, and Turkish government is bombing them. You are trying to refuse to recognize PKK, refuse to recognize PJAK, refuse to recognize Jalal Talabani. You are trying to tell me there is a parliament in Erbil, and that parliament happens to be helping Turkey.
Dr. Majid, do you agree that American support of the Democratic Union Party, the PYD, in Kobani is not only aiming at ISIS but also at Syrian President Bashar al-Assad eventually?
Well, that is what they are saying. They are saying, and Erdogan is saying that.
Yeah, but what do you think?
You see what is happening? The Kurds in Syria refused to join the Syrian opposition. Refused to join the Syrian opposition, and al-Nusra and ISIL decided to attack and killed many Kurds, Syrian Kurds, because they are refusing. The Kurdish in Syria, they want to have their own freedom, their own country, a peaceful country. Al-Nusra and Al-Qaeda and ISIL wanted the Kurds to come with them. They refused, and so they are now using them. Their aim is both America and maybe Turkey, definitely Turkey. They want to subjugate the Kurds in Syria and force them to not to be neutral, make them join them to attack, eventually to attack Syrian government. But of course they are failing, because already Medvedev, the president of Russia, said that the Americans have already changed their view about the toppling Bashar, because they failed after so many years. Now they want to use the Syrian Free Army and as many other groups to fight ISIL.
Yes, Professor Cemal Majid, political analyst and Kurdish expert, thank you very much for joining us.
With pleasure. Bye.
Dr. Milla, what Mark Urban, diplomatic and defense editor at the BBC, says that Kobani has presented ISIS with a chance for a big propaganda win, and then the coalition tried to hijack this win to get their own propaganda. That's why they're focusing their efforts now in Kobani rather in other parts of Iraq. So we've seen that Iraq has become less of a priority now.
Everybody make propaganda for themselves. The ISIS, the Western countries, and until the Dr. Majid as well, he makes something, his opinion, his ideas. In my opinion, the cause of the Kurds, it is outside the KDP, PUK, or PYD, or other groups. The Kurdish cause, it is about 1,400 years since the Arabs' invasion, the Islamic invasion come to our country. And they took our country, they looted, they false history wrote again, wrote it as they like, and occupied our people, our countries until now. And these massacres happened now in Kobani, and yesterday it was in Shangal, in the Yazidis, Kurds. And before that in Halabja, before that Anfal, before that. This all the result of the Kurdish cause, because we have no our Kurdish state. We have no our Kurdish right to protect our people. Should the map of the Middle East to be drawn again, because we've been whipped off from the map completely.
Yes.
And this federalism in Iraqi Kurdistan or autonomies not exist on the map.
Yes. And while it's not strategic, geography has been critical when it comes to Kobani because it does not allow ISIS to put Kobani under siege because Turkey is on one border of Kobani. Now, also from a military perspective, do you think the Kurds will gain momentum and they will succeed eventually in defeating ISIS because they have the option to have resupply chain in terms of their fighters from Turkey?
The Kurds, if they have their unity, they are much stronger than ISIS. I've been in the Kurdistan Revolution. In 1967, we had the battle of a war in Hendrin Mountain.
Yes.
About 3,000 Peshmerga against 35,000 Iraqi soldiers with their airplanes, tanks, and all kind of weapons. In the end of that war of Hendrin Mountain, the Iraqis army ran away from the mountain completely.
And when it's
so the Kurds have unity.
Yes.
1,000 of the Kurds stronger than hundreds of thousands of the other armies.
The Syrian government said Wednesday it too was providing assistance to the Kurds, joining a motley crew of Iranians, the US, Gulf countries, and many European nations. So it's getting a bit confusing over there between friends and foes. What do you think of this?
About
well, you have Iran supporting the Kurds, you have US and Gulf countries and European nations and even the Syrian government troops so trying to support the Kurds in Kobani. So don't you think here...
I don't think anybody of them supporting the Kurds. It is a play.
We've seen airdrops from the US.
The Western countries, if they want to support the Kurds, the best friends of the Western countries, Iraqi Kurdistan.
Yeah,
we joined the war. We joined shoulder by shoulder with the American, with the British army. Should establish their own state. Until now, the Kurdish Peshmerga, they have the Russian Kalashnikov in their hands. They have nothing.
But Kurds are protected. Other Kurdish minorities were and still are protected under the Syrian government. So
no, under threatened. Just 2 years ago, Al-Maliki, he came with the army of Dajla to Kirkuk, threatened the Kurdistan government. Yes. Until now, they don't pay the salaries of the Peshmergas.
Very briefly, let me just drop in also that the Americans only interfered militarily in Iraq when it was the Kurds in Mount Sinjar, not even the Christians in Al-Mosul. And now we are joined by Dr. Isa Shar, political analyst, joining us over the phone from London. Dr. Shar, the anti-ISIS campaign so far has actually had great difficulty in generating the kind of intelligence that allows effective strikes, and the dispersal of ISIS fighters among civilian communities are the prime reason why 90% or so of the missions designated for bombing have not released their weapons yet. Now, Dr. Shar, with Kobani being evacuated, do you think the coalition will be able to weaken ISIS dramatically along with the Kurdish fighters there?
Well, the role for defeating ISIS, the prime role for defeating ISIS has to be given and the Kurdish fighters have to be applauded and recognized for their role in defeating ISIS. If it wasn't for the Kurdish fighters, the YPG and the PKK, being present, men and women present alongside their comrades on the ground, that victory would not have happened. It is very, very important. Coalition forces, they do target ISIS, but there's misses, there's hits. There's also other powers that are playing alongside or supporting ISIS. These powers, until now, have not come alive to the international community. Who are they? It could be anybody from within the region. Turkey is playing a major, I would say, strategic and devious role. There is also elements from Saudi Arabia that are playing a a negative role as well. The influx of fighters, it has not stopped. There is talks. There's a lot of talk about there's still an influx of fighters through the borders of Turkey. This has been confirmed a number of times by some of the refugees who cross the borders into Turkey, seeing members who are belonging to ISIS crossing the borders into regions around Kobani. So they are ISIS-affiliated members under the watchful eyes of the Turkish army. There's other recognized and published information about members of ISIS being from the region, from the Kobani battles, being treated in hospitals in Turkey.
Yes. Dr. Jawad Millah, do you agree?
As I mentioned to you, not the American, not the Arab countries, not the opposition is serious to stop ISIS. Because now, if you heard in the news that 2,500 American airplane raid over ISIS. What's this army with 2,500 raids still going on? It is they are not serious, really. Maybe they empty bomb they hit. It was empty bombs.
Dr. Shahid, do you agree with analysts who think that the US is using air power in Kobani away from where they really need it because they have lacked the means to target ISIS in Anbar with the same intensity?
Sorry, I'm having quite a lot of difficulty hearing you. Can you repeat the question, please?
Sure. Do you agree with some analysts who think that the US is using air power in Kobani away from where they really need it because they have lacked the means to target ISIS in Anbar in Iraq with the same intensity that they are having in Kobani?
Well, if my capture of your question is right, there has been a number of miss and hit in Kobani with regard to the coalition forces. There is also a number of issues that have been raised that somehow ISIS seems to be playing. Somehow it's affiliated with some Muslim powers. Now, the credible information is not available to support this. We must really, that has to come alight in the future. Who is behind ISIS? There is an international consensus backed by the United Nations that a lot of countries are there to stop ISIS. There was a question mark about the intent. Were they there just to stop the movement of ISIS or to completely destroy ISIS? It's yet to be seen. Again, I would agree with your guest. It's the people on the ground that will do the job. But there's an element here. The issue, there is a lot of geopolitics in the region. The coalitions need partners. There is certain information that are flowing. Maybe they are not flowing correctly. I think they do not want. There's an issue with the geopolitics coming from Turkey. They do not want all of the Kurds to collate and to control that region completely. There's a fear that Kurdish coalitions will create a Kurdish autonomy, and somehow that will be a threat to Turkey. I think the Turk has to configure and have a relook at their policies and work with the Kurds rather than alienate the Kurds. The Kurds are members, as well as the Arabs, as well as the Turkmens, as well as the Armenians, are member of the communities that live in the region of the Middle East. They are part of this facade. People countries, governments have to work with those groups. Do not alienate one group on the expense of another group or on the expense of your geopolitics. Going
Yes.
back to your, sorry,
Yes,
go ahead.
go on.
One of the issues is now we do not know until now which international power is really playing in the hands of ISIS.
And
but
Dr. Issa
there-
Shara, and also you, Dr. Mullah, do you think Iran, Iraq, and Syria particularly, what are their stances? What are their stances going to be? And Turkey, obviously, when it comes to the self-proclamation of Kurdish autonomous entities, are they willing to give up territory for the Kurds? Because now that will open the door for others, be it in Turkey, in Iran, in Iraq as well. So they might have the same self-proclamation now. What do you think?
This war completely to not allow the Kurds to have their own state. It is the American idea,
Yes.
the support, military support from Turkey to ISIS, the money from some Arab states, and all of them, they cooperate together, and the American make themselves that hit the ISIS by fake bombs, 2,500 raids. It is not true. It is all of them. They decided to support ISIS, and ISIS themselves, they have no.
Are you linking it there? Are you saying that
Yes.
the support,
Yes.
American, as you say,
Yes.
support to
All
ISIS
of-
is to
all-
avoid establishing an autonomous Kurdish state?
All of them
Yes.
cooperate together. ISIS, the American, Turkey, and some Arab states with money. They support with money. They support them not allow the Kurds to have their own
But of course,
state.
they also didn't want President Assad to stay there. That was the basic agenda at the first time. In the first place, the main agenda was toppling President Assad's government. They
Assad-
never mentioned the Kurds in the beginning as part.
Assad himself, 3 years ago, finished.
Dr. Shah,
Now some Iranian, some Russian officers, they ruling Syria. Assad from 3 years ago finished.
Dr. Shah, back to my question. What do you think Turkey's stance will be, Iraq and Iran, to a self-proclamation for Kurdish territory and autonomy?
I think the region does not want a segregation based on ethnic. Let me tell you what the people want first, and then we'll look
Which
at
people?
what
The people of Syria or your people, whoever you may represent?
the people of the region, the whole people of the region, and I speak, I think, with whether be it Kurds, whether moderate, all of the moderate people, Arabs, Kurds, Armenian, Iranian, Turkish, and so on. The people on the ground do not want other ethnic wedges to be found in the region. Because what's happened, ethnic wedges, sectarian wedges, religious wedges are dividing us. We've had enough. Look at the European community. The European community have have pulled their horses together, whether being Saxon, Vikings, or others. They've come together as a community, a European community. In the we do not want other ethnic wedges, whether be it religious or sectarian or ethnic wedges. We need to work together as communities. Now, whether the politics allows it. Now, the regional politics need to improve towards an international standards where people and the countries and the representatives are working for the people. And I would say to our friend
Dr. Jawad Mullah.
Dr. Jamal Mullah, however your love to your ethnicity, however your love to your faith, however your love to your sect and so on, it is not more important than your love for your land and for the people, for humanity. At the end of the day, you could have been born as an Arab. You could have been born as a European. You could have been born as a Turk. So what's happened, what we want to create a new, what's needed is a Middle East, a region that's tolerant to all ethnicities, tolerant to all faiths, tolerant to all beliefs. It's important.
Yes.
The West, colonial powers, let me just highlight this point.
Sure.
Colonial powers have thrived on divisions.
Dr. Isa Shar, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Dr. Miller, of course, if you'd like to comment,
Yeah.
but let me ask you first, you spoke about the right to an autonomous region, and obviously, by all means, you are entitled to demand this. But then again, what does it mean to Israel around the border? You know, the establishing of the Islamic State, the fractioning of Arab states by giving autonomy to the Kurds and others. So Dr. Isa Shar believes that they should come together as an Arab nation because that's how they are the strongest. Unity is power. Now, when you want an autonomy here and there between Turkey, Syria and Iraq and Iran for the Kurds, does that not weaken you as an Arab? Because you do have also Arab identity in you. Geographically, you belong to this Arab world. What is your stance to the fractioning in opposed to Israel, basically? Is it not really for the benefit of Israel that this whole Arab world gets another map?
Who told you the area it is full of Arabs? This is not true at all.
Well, predominantly, it's an Arab world
the
over
Arabs,
there.
the Islam came to the Middle East.
Yes, ethnically, definitely.
And they occupied Middle East. It was belong the Kurds.
Yeah, I'm not denying this. I'm not denying this.
Listen to me. The Kurds, the Amazigh, the Copts, the Aramis, all of this nation being wiped out from the map completely. The Arabs, because if all these nations become Muslims and they learned Quran and become speaking Arabic, they make them Arabs. In Syria, I don't believe these people in Syria, they are Arabs, because Phoenicians, Canaanites, and Aramis, they have no any connection with Arabs and Jewish as well.
So should they be entitled to their own states just because they deny any Arab identity? What about nationalism?
The nationalists, the
Yes.
Arab nationalists, they after the first war, they in the hands of the Western countries with Sykes-Picot agreement, they occupied the Middle East, the lands of Amazigh, Kurds, Copts, Aramis, all these nations being occupied by the Arabs.
But nation states do have different ethnicities.
Listen,
Does it affect you to be Syrian?
This point, I finish it. The Western countries, they created these states and they put some gangs, some puppets ruling these states against the people of Kurdistan and Balochistan and Azeris and other many nations. The Aramis, they make them now as a small. They make the Aramis as a small minority, religious minority in Syria. It is not true. The Aramis, they are 4,000 years old. They are not a religion minority. They are a nationality of the Syria, the Aramis. Because Jesus, he brought his Bible in Aramaic language.
Yes.
So Aramaic is very old, not a religion minority. Before Jesus, these people there exist.
It appears perhaps that everyone involved in this fight against ISIS has their own self-motivated reasons for doing so. Let me wrap up with what has been described as a cryptic coalition. For President Assad, the international alliance against ISIS backs up what he had been claiming all along, that the whole thing in Syria is not a civil war, but that from the outset it was dealing with brutal and foreign terrorists. For Erdogan, the battle has the potential to fundamentally weaken the Kurds and, by extension, their struggle for their statehood. And for the US, it has admitted the battle for Kobani is part of a wider strategy to weaken ISIS across Syria and Iraq. But it seems there are other murkier motivations at play here, and we may not know what they are before it is too late. As this episode comes to an end, let me thank our guests here at the studio, Dr. Jawad Milla and Reverend Dr. Randy Short, who joined us from Washington, D.C., Professor Kamal Majid from London, and Dr. Fadi Hakura of Chatham House, and Syrian analyst Dr. Isa Shar. Thank you very much again for coming today, and we'll be with you again soon on Straightforward.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hello and welcome back to Straightforward, Levant TV's political debate show focusing on the Middle East. Relations between two major NATO allies, the US and Turkey, have suddenly assumed a new dimension over Kobani. The American move to arm Kurds in the city, also known as Ain al-Arab, is said to have a profound effect on regional balances between Turkey, the Kurds and the United States. But how effective is the airdrop arming campaign? On Wednesday, ISIS has released a video appearing to show fighters brandishing boxes of US weapons in Kobani, while they were intended for Kurdish fighters. For weeks, Turkey's military has blocked Kurdish volunteers, both Syrians and Turks, from joining their breath and holding out against fighters with the militant group Islamic State. Even more, many in Syria believe Turkey wants Kobani to fall. But what does arming the Kurds mean when it comes to Syria's president? We will be looking at this from more than one angle with our guest here at the studio, Dr. Jawad Milla, President of the Kurdistan National Congress. Welcome on Straightforward. And before we delve into our discussion, let's have a look at this brief report.
This week, the US military dropped weapons, ammunition and medical aid to Kurdish forces defending Kobani against Islamic State militants, while Turkey said it would allow Iraqi Kurdish fighters to reinforce the Syrian border town. Following several weeks of airstrikes by the US-led coalition in and around Kobani, the airdrops were the first time weapons and ammunition had been provided to local Kurdish forces. The US resupply effort marked a radical change in American policy towards direct cooperation with Kurdish fighters on the ground, whom Turkey has denounced as terrorists. Some observers
Ships with either the United States intelligence community or the partners of America's regional allies, the Saudis, the Turks, the Kuwaitis, the Qataris, the Israelis, and so forth, and the Jordanis.
And how can you assert that they do have such relations with US intelligence based on reports or?
Well, there are a range of things. I mean, the German intelligence has shown, 2 years ago, that the majority of the people that were fighting in Syria, this is like 2 years ago, like 80–90% were not Syrians. I mean, how did they get into Turkey? How do they get to have weapons as non-Turkish nationals? How do they get to train? How are they training in Jordan? I mean, how many countries allow people who are not nationals to come into their country and train and do infiltration actions? I mean, it's very obvious. In as much as these governments do these things under what we call plausible deniability, where it's hard to prove certain things, they make it hard. In fact, look at Sharina Shem.
Yes, I was going to ask you, what are your impressions of media coverage on Kobani, especially in the United States? And of course, if you would like to comment on Serina's death over there.
Well, I don't watch American media typically, so I can't speak to it. I worked in American media for 4 years, as well as did a stint at Voice of America. I don't have any confidence in American media, so I don't watch it. But from the apathy and the lack of knowledge of the rank and file American that I meet, I'm fairly certain that they get a bunch of garbage. But Sharina Shem's murder is an example of when people do.
Pointed out that the perceived policy shift in Ankara was no surprise, pointing to a string of violent protests that shook Turkey 2 weeks ago in response to the government's perceived inaction regarding the crisis in Kobani. Mesut Yigan, a historian of the Kurdish issue, said that Turkey could not risk the fall of the town. Meanwhile, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said he sees no difference between the PKK, which has been fighting for Kurdish self-rule in Turkey since 1984, and ISIS. US officials have stressed that their policy towards the Syrian Kurds and Turkey has not changed.
Let me just say very, very respectfully to our allies, the Turks, that we understand fully the fundamentals of their opposition and ours to any kind of terrorist group, and particularly, obviously, the challenges they've faced with respect to the PKK.
US Vice President John Kerry said that he and President Obama had made it very, very clear that it is not a shift of policy by the United States. But by bypassing Turkey and supplying the Kurds directly, Mr. Kerry's words leave some room for doubt.
Syrian Kurdish leaders were set to redraw the map of the Middle East last night with the imminent declaration of a self-governing region inside Syria. Dr. Miller, tell us what is happening in Kobani and how you see things as a separatist Kurdish politician yourself.
The Kurds, for a long time, without any state and without any government. Just recently, we had in Iraqi Kurdistan, and now we have autonomous area in Syrian Kurdistan.
Does every entity, do you think, need to have its autonomy, its own state?
I hope.
Do you think every ethnicity, like the Kurds, should have its own autonomous region? Not all of them have it.
Yes, I hope the autonomous region of the Kurds in Syrian Kurdistan, we call it as Western Kurdistan, and in the South Kurdistan, in the Iraqi Kurdistan. Yes. I hope this, the federalism, the autonomy, to go as one step to have our independence. Because we can't protect our people, our culture, our identity without state.
But also, if you have a strong state behind you, like obviously the Syrian government and its army, that also should be an umbrella to protect you, don't you think?
We learned, we have many experience in the history. The politics, fragile and bubbly and move from day to day. And yesterday something happening, it is possible to do it yesterday, today it is impossible to do it. So should the Kurds, as other nations in the world, to have their own state, to have their own independence.
And now let's speak to Reverend Dr. Randy Short of Social Action, Human Rights Minister and political analyst, joining us via Skype from Washington, D.C. Welcome on the show. Dr. Short, what do you think of the altering U.S. policy in Syria?
It's very inconsistent and it's very dishonest. The U.S. government has wanted to get rid of the Ba'athist government for decades, going back into the 1940s and 50s. And this most recent episode with ISL, ISIS, Daesh, whatever you want to call them, these are all people that have murky relations. You go on the ground and get this hard to find information that's obscured. It's at the risk of life and limb, and she's dead. There are 2 children with no mother.
Press review reporter, of course, we're talking about Serena Shams.
Yes, and the Turkish government said that she was a spy, and she's dead 2 days later. So we don't have to go for all of the extraneous points in this. President Erdogan of Turkey wants to be essentially a new Ottoman suzerain for the region. They have training bases. Everyone knows that they have that there. People see that Serena was able to expose that they were using NGO humanitarian trucks to bring soldiers into Syria, which is what cost her life. And the same thing, Jordan has things there. Everyone knows that these folks work with the Israelis, they work with Mossad, Shin Bet, they work with the Germans, they work with the Turks, they work with the Saudis. This is a fraud. What's really happening is they want to destroy Syria.
And back to mainstream media in America, do they entertain such thoughts that ISIS and other terrorist factions are working with Mossad and other sides?
The American media, the Middle East, I can just tell you, when I worked for the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer, from my understanding, news from the Middle East has to be vetted by the Israeli Defense Force, has a special office. So we get what the Israelis want us to know about what's happening in the Middle East. Why would they implicate the Mossad or their partners or Turkish intelligence or anyone else that they're working with? So, I mean, the American media, there's a CIA program